Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kyla Hannington, and I'm the Public Outreach and Engagement Division Manager with the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights. We are so happy to be partnering once again with our good friends, the Prince George's County Memorial Library System, in bringing you a conversation with a wonderful author. Tonight, we welcome local author Courtney Duke Foster in conversation about her debut novel, Passing Notes. Courtney is a lawyer mom by day turned fiction writer mom by night and day and all the time. Her storytelling career started early when she would tell her very loving and patient grandmother every word and detail of movies and television shows she had seen. Bitten by the writer bug a few years ago, she has written dozens of poems and short stories, and two of her short stories have been published in Bay to Ocean. A graduate of Spelman College and Duke University School of Law, Courtney grew up in Maryland, where she lives with her two awesome daughters and an extremely snuggly cat. In her spare time, she enjoys, well, writing stories, but also watching movies, attending musicals, and comedy shows. She loves the art of storytelling in all forms. Co-hosting with me tonight is Renee Battlebrooks, Executive Director of the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights. So welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I am so excited to be here as well. Good to see you both, my friends.
Yes, it's our pleasure. Friends, colleagues, that's right. You've worked with both of us.
Yes.
I just want to say this book is amazing. I encourage everyone to purchase it.
Yeah.
And or check it out in the library, but preferably purchasing it. It is amazing.
Yeah.
So, Miss Courtney Duke Foster, who we had no idea all of this was inside of you when we were working together. This is what makes it so amazing. What a beautiful book. What a beautiful story. What amazing parallels of sort of issues that we grapple with today.
Mm-hmm.
So what was your thought process, or how did you pick this to write about?
Well, I mean, I think it picked me more so than I picked it.
Yeah.
But when I worked with you, I didn't know I had that in me either. I just started writing probably about 6 or 7 years ago. Kyla was there. She was my first listener of a poem that I wrote that my father had asked me to write for a family reunion, and I don't know what possessed me to pull this innocent new employee into my office and say, "Listen to my poem, okay?" And
that was amazing. She was a lucky new employee.
And she did, and she's pretty much read everything that I've written since then. But this story of Passing Notes came to me. The ending really is what came to me first. I've been writing. I started with the poems, and then I started writing short stories, which are actually really, really long short stories. So I thought maybe I could try to write a book, but what do you write about? And the ending came to me, and I just kind of sat and thought, well, is this a story, or is this or something bigger? And it just seemed like it should be bigger, but I had to figure out, work my way backwards to figure out where it might have started. So that's where that came from. The topic of the book is essentially about passing for white, and it's in the early 1950s, so it's historical fiction. And that was just a topic that's always fascinated me from the time I was a little girl, and I watched Imitation of Life with my mom for the first time. I think I was probably about 9 years old. So I watched that. I watched that a lot of times, and I've read other books and watched documentaries about people who are passing or who have found out that their ancestors have passed for white. And it's just something that I wanted to kind of explore a little bit deeper, and I chose to do it in the form of a novel that looks at it from the perspective of the person who's doing the passing. So more so from the inside out rather than examining it from the outside in.
I thought the title of the book was brilliant.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, and whoever did the illustration, it's so nuanced, but brilliant. Talk to us about how you picked the title or how it was picked and sort of the illustration because it is beautifully done.
Well, the illustrator, the artist is Rochelle Dickerson, and she is a local artist as well. I worked with her mother, and her art is beautiful. She'd never done a cover before, so I just kind of told her what my idea, and I'm no artist, honestly. It would have looked like, for sure, stick figures. So she just ran with it, and it was, I always thought it was beautiful. So I was very fortunate to know her, and that she said yes, and she would take a stab at that. That was her first time doing that as well. And then the title, I'm not even really sure. I mean, I knew that the book was about passing, so I was like, well, how can I use that in a way that it also kind of describes the just the structure of the book, because there are notes, actual notes and letters in the book, notes between the main character Cheryl and her best friend Bettie, um, and between the Cheryl and her love interest, Cheryl and her parents, and it's just kind of a romantic idea that I have of the 50s, I guess, with correspondence and communicating before there was any text messages, and everyone didn't own a telephone. They relied pretty heavily on writing letters to communicate. There's a telegram in there as well, so it just felt right to incorporate that into the title as well.
I'm going to step a little bit out of turn right now to ask a question from an audience member, because we usually save them until the end, but because we were talking about how great this book is, encouraging people to get it, I do want to say now that I know the library has copies. You can also get it, Courtney, correct me if I'm wrong, you got it at Busboys and Poets online. People can get it from Walmart. They can get it from Amazon.
Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Busboys and Poets. I even saw it in local bookstores. Greedy Reads in Baltimore has it in their online store. Mahogany Books has it on their online store.
Mahogany's got it. Okay, great. So with the library, I'll speak on behalf of the library right now and say that the Mahogany Books is one of the library's partner bookstores. So that's in Southern Prince George's County, down at National Harbor, if I'm not mistaken. And so that's a great place to go to grab it if you want to look for a local bookstore. So I'm sorry for diverting, but I thought that was a really important thing to get to.
Yeah. And then the Mahogany Books and Busboys and Poets and any of your local bookstores, they will the part of the proceeds go to supporting local bookstores. It's actually a little bit cheaper buying it that way as well, maybe $1 or so less. So, there's a lot of places you can go, and you were right. It is at the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. And it's been checked out quite a bit. So that's exciting. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. So Kylie, did you have another question before,
Well,
I always have questions.
No, I did want to talk about I will just say I did put Courtney's website into the chat where you're watching, because I know someone's looking, also our favorite Miss Vivian's looking for where we can get that. So if you look in your chat, you should be able to find Courtney's website, and there is an order link right on her website too, where you can order it right now if you wanted to. So I did want to talk about, you said, it's a historical novel. It takes place in the 50s. How did you choose that time setting to center this story?
I well, I had been, and Kylie, you know this, I'd been writing several stories, longer kind of novellas that were all connected. And this kind of is a part of that as well, but more of a spinoff. So it worked because there's a little special character in this book that comes along at the end, and she was in on those stories as well. So this time period fit with when she would have been born. So that's kind of how I picked 1951, and then of course I had to pick, you know, who her parents would be, and you know what their ages are, and all of that kind of stuff. So, yeah, so it stemmed from that, and I just think that 1951 is such an interesting time period, especially for African Americans, because it's particularly for these characters, like kind of how all that developed, because they're coming from the South, on the cusp kind of the Southern civil rights movement into New York City, where you know labor and employment kind of protests and all of that had been going on for quite some time. So it's an coming of age for those characters, and understanding, you know, more about what they could do to kind of change the course of, you know, how they contribute to improving the lives of all African Americans at that time, before they even really knew that they had a voice in that.
Mhm. Did you have to do, or how much, take us through the research that you had to do to get centered in that time period?
I watched a lot of YouTube videos. I read books, I read articles, and I concentrated, you know, initially first on the story. So anything that I had to write about, that was represented in each part of the story, I had to research to make sure it was an actual thing in the 50s, or like what was train travel like at that time. What was it like to be just out of college at that time? What kind of typewriters did they use at that time? What kind of underwear did they, you know, wear? Every detail. Was Central Park open? What kinds of restaurants and activities might people do in New York in 1951, 1952? So not having any, you know, I wasn't born then, and I didn't experience time then. And even talking to my parents and a lot of their friends, they were very young children in 1951. So there were a lot of things they were able to help with. My father, in fact, pointed out that, because I had, you know, somewhere in there talking about pantyhose, and he was like, those weren't invented until 19 blah blah blah, whatever he said. And I was like, oh, how'd you come to know that? But yeah, so it just as I would write, you know, get an idea for what I wanted that scene or that chapter to be, the details, I just had to take a break. Sometimes I'd have to research something for a day or more to get a sentence or a paragraph. You know what I mean? Just
Mm.
but it was, you know, it's a lot of fun, because I'm also learning about something, and it was purposeful because I wanted my story to be authentic. And like there I just couldn't, you know, fathom the idea of having something in there that was not authentically a part of that era, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah. I am fascinated by this notion of sort of colorism, right? Because it's kind of woven, even though, you know, it is, as you beautifully said, from the person inside who is embarking upon this journey, however the journey occurred, right, of passing.
Hmm.
But there is an element of colorism that is sort of interwoven, because, you know, why else, right? But let's talk about colorism, because it still exists today, most definitely.
Hmm.
And what sort of parallels maybe do you see in your book and today?
Well, I mean, specifically in terms of colorism, you know, while the main character does end up passing for white, which is, you know, a whole extreme of, I guess, what colorism and racism is, but she experienced a lot of colorism in being fair skinned within her community, in the African American community, even from within her family somewhat. And then that is something that I know, myself and other lighter skinned people have stories, and some of them I even put in the book that, stuff I've heard from other people, they're experiencing with their family, and then maybe amplifying it, so that it's interesting and entertaining and establishes a conflict. But I think we all, still experience different things within our own community about complexion. I see it all over social media in terms of, who's black and who isn't, and who should be accepted. And as a part of the black community, I saw a post last week, it might have even been this week, where Shaquille O'Neal, I want to say, he's throwing a water bottle in a trash can and it misses. And he's like, he's the black Steph Curry. So there's a lot of posts in there, a lot of comments that saying, I thought, Steph Curry was black. And there's a lot of people say, no, he's mixed. No, he's not, he's not really, really black, stuff like that. And that was last week. So I think
Yes.
that colorism still continues to play a role in kind of how we look at each other and how we look at, ourselves and in the larger society.
I thought you did such a beautiful job of unpacking it in a non-threatening way, not
Okay.
pointing at anyone, but
Okay.
the notion that it hurts, that it's damaging, no
Mm-hmm.
matter which side or where it comes from, right? And I loved two things in particular when we're talking about this. One, sort of that confrontation with her older sister.
Yeah.
I've supported you, and right, and then our main character is able to say, yes, but you did right these things that have lifelong traumatic impact.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought the beautiful part that you wrote about the father when he is, extracting this promise that she will not tell the truth about who she is, and how he phrased it. It gave me goosebumps, about, actually, you're not living a lie. The lie is, right? I don't want to give it away to people who haven't read it, but it was so beautifully done. It's like, wow, I know Courtney. I know the person who wrote this, right? Because it just, in like two sentences, it's like, wow,
Yeah.
so many nuances.
Yeah. And I think that, especially at that time, it was such an such a much bigger deal that we probably can't even relate to it, of what, it's just so much segregation, so much opportunity that was not available to people within the Black community, for someone to step out of that and to pretend to be this other thing, was such a big deal, I think, at that time. No matter now how they thought of it, how they came to do it, it was just, and it posed some danger to them. And I don't think that we understand that, maybe we might be embarrassed if, someone finds out we're not telling the truth, but they had real life consequences in some, instances that could have led to people actually losing their lives, not just their livelihood, because of being found out for taking that route,
Yeah. I was just reflecting sort of on the whole term passing, right? When I think about, like, what
Mhm.
does it actually mean, and where does it come from? And it's rooted so much in our racist history, and in our, sort of the colonialism and all the things. It didn't matter how you looked. It was, if you had one drop, then you
Mhm.
were black, right? And so this whole notion, and I was sort of thinking, my first thought was, well, are people doing the same thing today? And then the other thing is, well, Renee, that's silly to even ask, because that concept is such a construct of things that we are working so hard to put behind us, right? And so why does someone have to pick somebody who
Mhm.
may be biracial, or or right, you know, more than one. Like, why do you have to pick a box and
Right.
deny all, you know, the other parts of you? And so it's just it has so much relevance in our human rights, our civil rights, and the struggles that we are still working through in this country.
Oh
Mhm.
yeah, I agree 100%. You know, why I think it becomes clearer and more obvious that race and all of this is just purely a social construct. The more
Exactly.
that the further we get, you know, away from those things, because you know more people, they're more mixed race people in the world. They're multi-racial, multicultural people in the world, and the idea that you'd have to choose. Um, you know, it's somewhat people are trying to hold on and preserve their culture in a sense, but we don't have the same constraints that we had back then. We don't have the same interactions with each other. We are free to move about the world and experience everywhere. So it's just, you know, just more and more blending. It just makes it that much more obvious that these were just things that were put upon us rather than something that really actually makes a difference, you know?
That's
Mhm.
right. That's
Mhm.
right. Right. We can all be our true and authentic self without labels.
We can.
Without
Or we
labels.
can, or we can choose to have labels. I mean,
That's right.
it's just kind of like we just have to be able to accept that people are free to choose
That's it.
who they are and
That's right.
and what they want to associate with and what resonates with them.
That's right. Labels of our own choosing, not of what others. Yeah. Kyla.
Well, I mean, there's a lot that we could talk about right there. I feel like we can definitely, because one of the things I was thinking about is it's more complex though. Like, even again, the context of this book. So if we think about choosing a label, in the case of the main character, a label was chosen for her, and she did not dispute it vigorously. I'll say.
Right.
I,
Or at
I don't
all.
want to speak in circles, but I do want to give people the opportunity to read the book too.
Mhm.
And so she then, and I guess this is kind of the idea with colorism and race and this whole social construct is like what, like she was able, she chose to live to a certain extent under a certain label that other people, including her, I think at times felt was not real, but also like what, like it also was real. Like that's what I feel like. It's a huge. What she did is
Mm,
by erasing your family becomes problematic if you, if when you're talking about choosing the label, how does one do that in a way that is not that's authentic, um, and still like how do you allow your full humanity, I guess, and to live in the way that is comfortable to you, that is not being put upon you, but that's also not erasing elements of yourself? Or do we need to do that? Do we need to worry about erasing elements of ourselves? I guess this is the big question.
and who decides?
Well,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Courtney.
No, I don't know. I'm just saying these are all great questions, and I think that it's something that an individual person has to decide. But you also have to understand that you know people have their opinions about it, right? And it's not, you know, you might have the rights and the authority and the self determination to make these choices for yourself, but you are doing so in a world with other people who also have strong opinions about the way things should be. So it can be difficult. It can be a hard road if you are in an unconventional kind of making an unconventional kind of choice that is not sanctioned or what society isn't used to. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do that. You just should understand that this might be difficult, right? This isn't going to be the easy road. It's not going to be smooth. Just, you know, definitely what Cheryl figured out. You know, it's not. it's not just a notion to, to just pretend to be white at work, because, especially if she is then falling in love and making friends, and she has to eventually, gradually eliminate her involvement with her family and other friends, and just so that she doesn't get outed. So she's not, she doesn't lose everything that she has, which she mentions in the book. She's worked all these many months. She's not going to give that up now,
Right.
over something that she doesn't have to necessarily do.
And
It wasn't an easy thing for her to do.
that those are places that and spaces that she would otherwise have been excluded from, not from her merits or lack of merits, but because of racism. With, he was an extremely capable, like the most capable person, who would have been denied the chance. And in fact, the company would have denied itself opportunities if the company would have been worse off for those choices. Yeah, there's a lot. We could spend a long time on identity.
Right. And then,
Yeah.
and that's, that also goes to, the sexism that's in there too. There were other, at least they believed they were, just as capable and had done just as many great things as she had, but hadn't been recognized, but for some, kind of fluke and fate
Right.
situation, she probably would not have been noticed in that way and been able to elevate herself in that company either, because women were accessories, so to speak, and the help in that publishing company, more so than people they were thinking would, achieve, higher level positions.
I found it curious, sort of tangentially related to this, the part about sort of one of the big bosses and the seasonal party, and who was invited and who wasn't. But then fast forward to like I'm being cryptic on purpose because of those who haven't read it, but the happy occasion between Cheryl and someone else at the house of this person, right?
Yeah.
And the friend shows up in disguise, but he recognizes her and the friend's husband, but yet, right, this sort of paradox of the big boss actually recognizes somebody who's, a lowly employee and a lowly employee of color. Cordial recognizes, sees them as a human being, but not enough to include at the seasonal party.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what was there a message or subliminal, or like, I found it very interesting.
Well, I think that, when Cheryl and Betty first go to, and you become employed and they first start working there, I think that the character Ruth sums it up, and that, image is everything to them. And it's not to think that they're this new kind of hip or innovative company, but they have adopted and brought a lot of the same conservative points of view or philosophies and values from the company they broke away from, and that the image is everything. And I think that has, they're, subconsciously, the reason why Cheryl was chosen probably to take that document to upstairs,
Right.
is because she was lighter than the other person who was actually standing there too. So it's like, it's just, I'm just naturally going to go to this person who would look better walking through that front office. And I think that with Mr. Bird and also his son, I think that it was very clear that they had I would just say, an appreciation for the, Black culture and abilities and achievements, but because of the time that they lived in, they would never discuss that or share that or promote that out in the open. But I think that, he can see that that employee was quality, and she was, but for her race, she would have done very well at that company.
Yeah. The paradox of Mr. Bird's son was fascinating. Just
Mhm.
spewing hate, but then his actions, I mean, his actions were consistent with hate, but then humanity in some respects. I mean, he could have turned a blind eye, may arguably, right? I agree with your sort of look. Like, there's so much to unpack. Like, what does it really mean, right?
Mhm.
Um, it's weird. Yeah, yeah. Great job, because it just, there's so much to think about.
Right. Yeah, he's to represent, he's that voice of of racism, that out loud, this is what we think. Don't worry about what I do. This
Right.
is this is how I feel, and I also have the right to do what I want to do. You don't challenge me on that. I will definitely pursue my passions and my preferences, but we don't talk about that, nor don't you dare speak to me in that way, and that, sets up a nice little active scene, I think, between those two characters. But yeah, I think that that is the conflict that 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 you can see from the other side. It's like they also have things that they give up, that they have to hide because of the time that they live in,
And
as
maybe
well,
humanity was
essentially. Yeah.
right. And maybe humanity was too much of a generous word, um, because sort of taking care of those that he had responsibility for, maybe it wasn't humanity.
Um, I don't know. I think that everybody has a level of humanity, and I think that um, that that's a good thing, that he at least handled his responsibilities in that area. But he was certainly, you know, lacking in the way that he interacted with the world in general, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I think that it does kind of soften him a little bit to know that he didn't he didn't shirk that on that end, but he wasn't great there either.
Mhm.
He
I
had to be
agree.
reminded. He
Yeah.
had to be reminded of his responsibilities in a very visible and out loud manner. Sometimes that
Yeah.
it jarred him into remembering that people are over here.
So he was
Yeah.
a bad, easily. I think I like Renee's appreciation for being able to see some, find a glimmer of goodness there. But I think if we were going to divide characters into like good and bad, he
Yeah,
would be on the bad side. But I
right.
do think that what we're talking about here captures something that I think you did so well throughout this book, is capturing human complexities. So even for our good characters on the good side, which is most of the people we interact with, that we see these, like even the main character, like making some decisions or passively going along with some things that caused
Mhm.
great heartache. I mean, real pain,
Right.
um, to herself and to others. So that I think you did this incredible job of developing deeply nuanced, realistic characters. Which, first of all, I think is extremely hard to do, and second, I mean, can you talk about how, if you're able to, like your process for really breathing out these fully human characters?
I just always just think of people in general as not all good or not all bad. I always kind of recognize both sides of the coin, and we all have our moments. Even if we are the typical inherently good people, we can make bad choices. We can hurt people either on purpose or accidentally. And I think that villains are not just one dimensional either. They have their moments where, even if it's by accident, they might do something nice. And I think I do have another villain in there that doesn't enjoy any real moments of goodness or humanity. And I'm talking about Mrs. Kavanaugh. I don't think we ever
Yes.
see her do anything that we could point to as nice. But that's, that's her thing. So that's fine too. But yeah, so for me, I always want my characters to feel like people you might know or people you might want to know, right?
Right.
Not and not I want someone to be able to resonate with the ones that are considered villains as well as the ones that are supposed to be the heroes, because everybody has flaws and everybody has finer moments. I guess that's the way I look at it. So when I write anything, or any characters, I want to think of them as like a whole real person with all of those elements, and then figure out how that lends itself to the plot.
Excellent job. Because it's all very nuanced. So it makes it harder to like, I don't like that person, but okay.
Yeah. So even if you are, you really don't like Miss Kavanaugh, you might kind of laugh a little bit at some of the things that she said. Oh, well, she's a funny mean lady or something like that.
Right. A consistent mean lady.
She's consistent. That's a positive attribute, right?
That's right. Right.
Because some people have difficulty achieving consistency. So I guess we can say that is her claim to fame too.
So Renee, can I go with another one?
Oh, please. Yeah, I was going to.
So Renee and I can get going and we can, I want to make sure that you get a chance to, Renee. We got a message here from our friend. So one of the things, I've been very fortunate, and so those of you watching at home probably got a little bit of a sense that Courtney and I have known each other for a few years. As she said, we met when I was a brand new employee at a place that neither one of us work any longer. And she had written, Courtney, you'd written this like absolutely like stunning poem for this family reunion. And as you said earlier tonight, that kind of opened up for you. All of these stories started pouring out. And so I've been very fortunate that I've got to spend a few years with your characters and with some of these stories. And I know that for those who haven't had that opportunity yet to have this richness, I was hoping you could talk a little bit. I know you've got something else that we're working on, not we, it's actually not me. You are working. I would like to be working on it with you. This is my pitch. No, that you are working on putting out into the world. So can you talk a little bit about what's coming, and is there a linkage to this story or some of how it fits in with your broader body of work?
Absolutely. So I wrote this story, this book, and then I wrote another second part to it right after. So both of these were written about 4 or 5 years ago, I would say. And the next one is about the main character, Cheryl. It's about her grandson. So in that, he is a troubled musician trying to find connection with his family. To put it in a nutshell without giving away too many details, but he has had some hard times and some struggles. Extremely talented, but not so much in keeping or maintaining connections with his immediate family, his own wife and children, and also his parents and grandparents as well. So we get to follow his journey in discovering kind of who he really is.
Is that published yet, or that's still?
I'm working on it. It's with an editor right now, because he is a musician and I am not. I am not a musician. I do listen to music, but I wanted to make sure that I was fortunate enough to have an editor for Passing Notes who is actually a musician. So she was excited and very willing and thankfully available to help me edit this one because I needed it from, someone to look at it from that perspective. And because authenticity is always very important to me.
Excellent.
So
I
that's
can't wait.
what's next. That's where I am right now. And I hope to, I'm hoping a target for the end of the year to publish that. But, I'm at the beginning stages of getting that put together.
I can't wait. That's going to be fabulous.
Thanks.
I wanted to go back for a moment to really talk about um, sort of the stress of living this. I won't say it's a double life because it really wasn't, but living this alternate life. And
Mhm.
as you pointed out, things that you couldn't do perhaps uh, for fear of being discovered, right? So almost placing yourself in a cage. But sort of that stress and trauma of giving up meaningful relationships and loved and supportive relationships, and maybe juxtapose that with how we deal with trauma today. How, I don't know, are there any correlations? I know that's a broad question, but maybe just talking through what life lessons we can learn, or what can we pull from this that we can apply when it comes to that sort of choice,
Mhm.
consequences,
Mhm.
and following, trauma.
Well, I think that, just kind of to be flippant, always listen to Betty. Betty told her, "Go ahead and tell that man who you are." And she
Yeah.
said, "No, I'm listening to my dad." And she
Right.
didn't share that, and it turns out that that caused her more anxiety than she needed to have,
Yeah.
really, to a very tough time for any woman to experience and to kind of feel alone, and that she really wasn't alone, and or didn't have to be, right? As
Right.
it turns out. So I think that the lesson is that your anxiety or the thing that you are keeping secret about yourself, and it could be that, or it could be anything really, um, isn't as big as you probably think it is, right? It won't.
Yeah.
It's not as detrimental. Um, it's Your life is not going to be over if people know this thing about you, and you will find the people who who are supposed to be there for you and with you when you present yourself as your true self. I think.
Mhm.
I just think that's true for any people, any of these stories that I have read, or any movies that I've seen of people who chose this path, really gave up a significant part of themselves that puts up a wall with them connecting fully with the outside world, and losing that connection is I think the most important thing that they lose in doing something like this, um, passing for anything,
Mhm.
that you don't
Mhm.
feel is your authentic self. She didn't feel like, she loved her family, even if they had issues. She did not want to not be a part of that. She um, spoke to that and how much she missed certain things, and when big things happened, she couldn't share that with them. And that was, you said, a small family, and they were quite close. So yeah, so I think that had she been more honest, and that's a difficult thing to do when this is what you've decided to do, then she would not have experienced the trauma in the way that she did for the period of time that she did. And I think that's going to be um, evident as in book two as well. Yeah.
Yay. Okay. Great life lessons. I mean, it's true.
And 100% as you're talking like this, the not having secrets, or somehow being able to not live in secret, whatever that is, whatever your secret that you're hiding. once you don't have that anymore, I think it's like truly liberating.
Yeah.
Or to put it, that it's so. I loved your description about it's this wall between people and like a full relationship with the outside world. Um, I do have two questions from audience members, so I'm going to put them up. We still have lots more, Courtney, but I'm going to put the two in that we have right now. So our good friend Miss Vivian is wondering if the book is also about school. So I thought I'd give that to you to answer for her.
It's not about school. It's about two young women who have just graduated from college and they are starting their life looking for a career that's free from the shackles of Jim Crow. So they're very young. They're in their early 20s, looking for employment. And then for the most part, it's just about them starting their career at this publishing company, basically. So it has some elements in it that that are schoolish because they both, particularly Cheryl enjoys reading. So we talk about, me and Kyla in the book talk about books that these characters read, and they shared with each other. So that's kind of how they connect to one another. So you'll get some elements of that, but no, it's not about school.
Thank you very much for that. And then we also have a question from Lisa Hall Johnson. Do you think passing is as common now as it was in 1951? And then as you sort of think to formulate an answer, also like how come or why not?
Hi, Lisa Hall Johnson.
I feel like I'm the only person who doesn't know Lisa Hall. Hi, Lisa Hall
I
Johnson.
think you probably do. You just don't know that you do. But that's interesting. That's an interesting question because I read an article that was probably written in 2014 that said, the title was "Is passing passing?" So basically, is it passe? Is it even a thing anymore? Does it matter? And I'm sure that it takes, it has taken on a whole different character now, because while there were people who passed for Black in, going back way back, there's people who've passed for Black, Latino, or Native American, and all of that kind of stuff. We have, most recently we can point to Rachel Dolezal, who is a white woman who passed for Black as well. I think that we probably see a little bit more of that, or know more about that. So I think it's changed characters. People who want to have a more ethnic connection or ancestry will, bring that up, and they could be deemed as passing for that. But I don't think that it's the same as it was probably in the 50s and before, and then around that time period. But I also don't think that it's passe or it's out of or that people don't do it anymore. I just don't think that has the same consequences and that we look at it the same way. It's kind of more about, choosing to be people being more free to choose and to represent themselves the way that they want the world to see them. Um, but what I kind of feel like is that the passing that was done in the past, people are living kind of the aftermath of that. So where you find, you can look into your DNA, you can get your DNA tested, and more people are finding that they are, part of. They have certain DNA, sub-Saharan African, and other, pretty significant percentages of those that they didn't even realize because they didn't realize that their ancestors or the family members had passed back then. Now they have a whole different perspective, or they could have a whole different perspective about who they are and what that means. What exactly does that mean? So I just think it has taken on a different different character, I don't think that it is, something that's old fashioned necessarily, even today. That's a good question. Sounds like she's a smart lady.
I think so too. Uh, do you know, as I was turning the pages, do you know, I kept expecting or wondering, so I was bracing myself for the two young men on the train on the way up to New York to somehow be instrumental in outing Cheryl.
No.
I'm like, is Courtney setting me up? Like, when is it happening? Like,
Yeah, that would have been a good little thing if she ran into them. Yeah.
oh, but the way you
Well,
did it was
plot twist.
brilliantly. I'm just like,
Hmm.
again, just bracing, like, okay, they're going to jump out now.
Hmm.
But it was such a
I think.
great sort of vignette that highlights and the hurt, and the
Hmm.
condemnation that she also felt from her fellow travelers,
Hmm.
right? So the hurt that all she did was exist.
Right. Right. And that she has a certain burden to kind of understand, to see herself the way other people see her. Right. So
Right.
for her, she's just a young African American or colored woman sitting on a train, thinking about getting a new job. And these people come to her
Right.
and look at her and think of her as a certain way. And that's the
Right.
same thing that happened, when she was a little girl.
Yeah.
And it kind of, sets it up to understand why she would have so much anxiety about people finding out the truth about her, because it never turned out well for her. It didn't.
Right.
Lost, opportunity for maybe a nice dinner and a date or something, or
Right.
a nice little friend to play with. When folks found out the truth, that she never even, she didn't even tell them one way or
Right.
the other. That's just
That's
what
right.
they looked at her and they said, "Oh, you must be white, and you're a-okay." And then now we find out you're not. You must, we must depart. We cannot be
Right.
associated with you anymore. And then
And the
also,
whole thing
when
is
she was out and another and that incident happened when she was on a date, so all of those things set up to understanding that people knowing the truth, or people think about her, is very important to kind of her survival.
yeah, I started thinking sort of about that, and maybe, our friends and relatives or acquaintances that, are also living with different truths, and, it may not be a truth that is immediately apparent, as in Cheryl's. It's not immediately apparent, right? And so, like, no one has a responsibility to announce to the world, is she supposed to walk into each train car and say, I'm a colored woman,
Right.
right? I mean, our other acquaintances supposed to announce other things about
Mhm.
themselves, right? So it's just, it really was a lot of food for thought about how we judge and then condemn
Well,
at the same time from
I,
our
Mhm.
own judgments.
I think where you're going, like, what do we demand people disclose to us? Or assume if they don't disclose, that
Right.
our need to categorize people. I mean, we talked about
Exactly.
earlier. We talked about maybe choosing to categorize ourselves and what labels we claim, and it's not necessarily a negative thing. It's like, what part of ourselves do we do we
Yeah.
talk about our faith, or do we talk about our for those of us who weren't born in the States, maybe we talk about where the country we're from, or whatever, like that these are not, it's not bad to claim an identity. But this other part is like asserting an identity on top of somebody, and then demanding that they accept or correct you, um, outside of their own comfort. And
Mhm.
yeah, I don't have a conclusion except to say there's a lot to think about how. And I think for us in the Office of Human Rights, one of the things we often think about is like, for our own and inside our own selves as humans in the world, but also in the work that we do, is like, how can we all sort of think about what is it that we're imposing on other people, and how can we try to do that less?
Right.
I
Right.
think this book speaks exactly to that.
Really does. I think about our trans brothers and sisters, and what do we do? What have we done? It's not anybody's business. And sort of that judgment and that anger, and we're sort of seeing it playing out in other states, and and sort of laws, and it's really it's not a good time.
Right. It is definitely something to think about, and we can really only, we can only control ourselves. So we just think about what are the expectations that we have of other people sharing personal things about themselves that don't really matter. Like, at the end of the day, it mattered only because of the way the society was structured in 1951, of whether or not Cheryl was a colored woman or not. But we know now that didn't really matter, right? So we can learn from that and say, well, what else doesn't really matter? You know what I mean? Like,
what's our 1951 moment right now in 2023?
Right.
And we have several now, right? We think we're very enlightened, but we have dragged those same things into 2023 about what we think everything should be. And
So
you should.
we just have we have a comment that I'd like to share, because I think it's also worth talking about more fulsomely. We've got like a minute left to talk about it. But as I read, I think about my mom's generation. The writer's mom is 95 years old. And you, Courtney, are the writer's junior. And the experiences that the mom had during her lifetime as compared to the experiences that you have had in yours, is the comment from also a former coworker of mine and Courtney's. It's like old friends week.
Mm-hmm. That's a good comment. That's true.
Yeah.
Like, how much do we have? How much do we have in common, and how far have we come, and what are things that we can kind of learn from the sacrifices and the strength of the women and the people of our ancestors and descended from, and how we can make them proud and do stuff to change things that are still negative aspects of how we interact with each other.
And I think that's key, Courtney. It's, I'm always looking for the takeaway. What can we do to improve our own communities, our own sphere of influence, our own families, our self, even, right? And this is a lot of food for thought, a lot.
It really is. I like this takeaway. I love this takeaway, which is what is happening in here, which seems to us from our lens so inappropriate, such a loss, that what is our moment now for us in 2023, and how do we identify that in ourselves and then do otherwise. I will say that we are pretty much out of time. And so I have to just take a couple minutes to, first of all, thank Courtney so much for spending time with us. It's an absolute pleasure for us to see you again. I'm speaking on behalf of Renee, also your other coworker from another job. And it's just been wonderful for us to get to be with you. And both of us, we've been texting each other. We've been emailing each other about this book, behind the scenes over the last few weeks as we've been reading it, and just absolutely love it. So it's great. Thank you so much for your time. For all of you watching at home, we've already talked about how great it is. You really, really, really should get a copy. Courtney, I believe, has a book signing coming up in Howard County that she would love for you to come to. It is in March, and hopefully she's going to be able to tell you off the top of her head when it is.
Yes. It is on March 11th, 4:30 to 7:30 at this wonderful co-working space called The Third. It's at the lakefront in Columbia, Maryland. But thank you both so much. I really enjoyed this. It went so fast, but you can't talk all night. But thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed it, and I hope to see you both really soon.
Yeah, well, I'm going to find you so you can sign it.
Yes. All right. So thank you all for being with us. Please get a copy of the book when you get a chance, and check out civilrights.mypgc.us to see what the Office of Human Rights has going on. And you can also go to pgcmls.info/events to see what our friends at the library have coming up for you. Again, thank you everybody so much for being with us. Thank you, Courtney, and everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.